reputation of the national carrier has taken a battering, and the reputation of the nation is also under threat.
4 weeks on from the plane mysteriously disappearing, time is running out.
It is a very, very big story beyond you and me. And I think even governments have to play their role.
There's a reference number on this part of the airplane.
This plane was never meant to be found.
.30 a.m. March 8th, 2014. Beijing Capital Airport. The regularly scheduled Malaysian Airlines flight from Kuala Lumpur, MH370, is due to touch down at any moment. On board, Captain Zahari Ahmad Shahar, First Officer Fariq Abdul Hamid, 10 cabin crew, and 227 passengers. But flight MH370 won't be arriving on schedule. In fact, it won't be arriving at all.
Malaysian 370 is set to Beijing via Pibos Alpha departure, 6,000 feet, squawk 2157.
Beijing Pibos Alpha 6,000, squawk 2157, Malaysian 370, thank you.
Malaysian 370, welcome, over the ground.
Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah signs in for duty, followed by First Officer Fariq Abdul Hamid. Midnight. The aircraft's SDU logs into the Inmarsat satellite communication network. 12:27. ATC gives MH370 clearance to push back from the gate.
Mission 370, taxi to Orion Alpha 11, runway 3 to right via standard route, Horseshoe Bravo. Alpha 11, standard route, Horseshoe Bravo, Malaysia 370.
12:40. MH370 is cleared for takeoff.
370, 3 to right of takeoff. Nice. 3 to right of Malaysia, Malaysia 370. Thank you.
ATC then instructs MH370 to climb to flight level 180, approximately 18,000 feet, and proceed directly to waypoint Igari. ATC then hands off MH370 to Lumpur Radar ATC, based at Kuala Lumpur Area Control Center, or KLACC for short.
Malaysian 370, Lumpur Radar, good morning, climb flight level 250.
Morning, level 250, Malaysian 370.
Malaysian 370, climb flight level 350.
Climb level 350, Malaysian 370. It's 370, maintaining level 350.
Malaysian 370.
Captain Zahari informs ATC that MH370 is now flying at flight level 350. Flying conditions are optimal. It is a clear evening. Just over 10 minutes later, KLACC instructs the crew to contact Ho Chi Minh ACC.
Malaysian 370, contact Ho Chi Minh 120.9, good night.
Then, just as MH370 passes waypoint Igari, Captain Zahari confirms this in what would become the last ever broadcasted message between MH370 and the world.
Good night, Malaysian 370.
Less than 2 minutes later, MH370 unexpectedly disappears from radar. Over the coming hours, numerous events would unfold, resulting in MH370 never making it to its planned destination in Beijing. And at 6:42, Malaysian Airlines issues a press statement announcing that Flight 370 is officially missing. By doing so, they set into motion a decade of mystery, speculation, and conspiracy, and give way to the biggest and most expensive search in aviation history.
At this hour, a desperate search is underway for MH Flight 370, which departed Kuala Lumpur at 12:41 a.m. local time and was due to land in Beijing at 6:30 a.m. Air traffic control lost contact with the plane about 2 hours after takeoff. Whether the disappearance is due to mechanical problems, pilot error, or even terrorism is yet to be determined.
One piece of debris doesn't represent my husband. It just says the plane is there, so now you need to bring everyone back.
Twice, a piece of wrapped bronze. It doesn't convince me.
This is the MH370 Enigma. At 1 hour, 21 minutes and 13 seconds, MYT, less than 2 minutes after the final radio communication between ATC and the aircraft, MH370 vanished from radar in Kuala Lumpur, Ho Chi Minh, and Bangkok, indicating the 777's transponder was no longer functional. After failing to establish contact with MH370, Ho Chi Minh ACC requested that a nearby aircraft attempt contact. Only static was heard in reply. After almost 20 minutes of no contact, Ho Chi Minh ACC reached out to Kuala Lumpur to inquire about MH370's whereabouts. Both ground stations reported losing the aircraft on radar, with its last known position being reported near waypoint Bitad. Despite the transponder being inactive, Malaysian military radar was still able to track the aircraft's location every 10 seconds, which showed the following. Immediately after disappearing from ATC radar, the aircraft made a small right turn, followed by a prolonged left bank, turning the aircraft back on itself and instead pointing in a southwesterly heading, aiming back towards Malaysia. It continued in this direction until it reached the island of Penang, where it made another turn, this time northwest, flying up the Strait of Malacca. It stayed on this heading until 2:22 a.m., where it seemingly flew out of reach of the military radar. The last primary radar contact was made at 200 nautical miles northwest of Penang. From here, the trail seemingly goes cold. As the transponders were inactive, it was incredibly difficult to determine where the aircraft traveled after this point. During this time, 2 attempts were made to contact the cockpit directly via satellite phone at 2:39 and 7:13. The calls were routed to the plane directly, but were not answered. Another call was attempted during this time also, from the mobile phone of the first officer, Farik Abdul Hamid, or at least that's what numerous media outlets reported after the disappearance.
Sources tell CNN First Officer Farik Hamid's cell phone was on and searching for service roughly half an hour after all of Flight 370's communications mysteriously shut off. Information CNN has learned that Malaysian authorities first gave to the U.S. a while ago.
It would be rare, very rare in my opinion, to have someone with the cell phone on in the cockpit. It's never supposed to be on at all. It's part of every checklist of every airline I'm familiar with.
It was, however, understood to simply be his mobile phone registering a location-based signal with a telecommunications tower on the ground. Whilst not the breakthrough some thought it to be, it was an interesting find for both location and altitude, indicating the aircraft was low enough to connect to said tower. Modern airliners, including the 777, are outfitted with a satellite communication terminal, or SATCOM for short. As was routine, MH370 logged into the SATCOM network shortly before departure, connecting with a ground station in Perth, Australia. After failing to find any indication of the aircraft, Past the last point of contact over the Strait of Malacca, investigators of the MH370 case studied the SATCOM information and ascertained that at some point during the plane's return over Malaysia and past Penang, the SATCOM link was severed. However, just a few minutes after military radar lost contact, MH370's SATCOM terminal sent a log-on request to the Inmarsat satellite communications network and successfully re-established a connection that was then not interrupted for 6 hours, at which point the flight is presumed to have run out of fuel. Despite the period of between 22 and 68 minutes where the SATCOM was lost, the reconnection was a significant indication of the aircraft's activity. When an aircraft is not heard from in over an hour, an automatic status request is sent via satellite to check that the terminal is still connected to the network. It is sometimes referred to as a handshake. When MH370 logged back onto the network some 4 minutes after leaving military radar, it allowed the ground station to then continue sending these updates, which ended up becoming a huge advancement in the process of mapping MH370's journey. The investigation now contained solid information that the aircraft was still active for some time after radar loss. However, the SATCOM signals retain no information about location or altitude and exist solely to ensure the receiving terminal is still online. In a feat of calculation never before used in an investigation of this kind, analysts at Inmarsat were able to work out the distance between MH370 and the satellite based on the time it took for the signal to be sent to the aircraft, replied to, and then in turn received. Considering variables such as how the location of the satellite would alter its internal temperature, and thus how long the computer process would take. This discovery led investigators to determine the following 7 rings of potential position at the time of each hourly handshake, taking into account the information about the aircraft's last known position and other indicating factors. Investigators deduced 2 arcs, aptly named the Northern Corridor and the Southern Corridor, where it is believed MH370 could have been at the time of its final handshake at 8:11 a.m. The investigation team then employed a new technique whereby they assisted a calculation of burst frequency offset to determine the aircraft's speed and position along said arcs. BFO considers the effect of the Doppler shift, which, in short, is a shift in frequency based on relative movement of the aircraft, satellite, and ground station. Once this variable can be isolated from the BTO, a more accurate calculation of position was able to be made. This technique had never been used before, and as such, the theoretical findings about MH370 were cross-checked with known information of 6 other Boeing 777 aircraft flying in various directions on the same day. Applying these equations to MH370 SATCOM information rendered results that correlated heavily with the southern trajectory, but did not correlate with the northern estimation. Inmarsat 3 F1, the satellite used to communicate with MH370, had a slightly inclined orbit, as opposed to a geostationary orbit. This is done by some companies in order to conserve fuel and extend the lifespan of a satellite. This had an effect on the original BFO calculation, which eventually led to the northern trajectory being completely disregarded. And so, at 10 p.m. on the 24th of March, Prime Minister Najib announced via press conference that Inmarsat and the AAIB had deduced Flight 370 had ended in the southern Indian Ocean sometime after its final contact with the Perth ground station.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Prime Minister of Malaysia.
Based on new satellite communication, we can say with a high degree of certainty that the aircraft communications addressing and reporting system, or ACA, was disabled just before the aircraft reached the east coast of Peninsula Malaysia. It then flew in a westerly direction back over Peninsula Malaysia before turning northwest. Up until the point at which it left military primary radar coverage, these movements are consistent with deliberate action by someone on the plane. According to the new data, the last confirmed communication between the plane and the satellite was at 8:11 a.m. Malaysian time on Saturday, 8th of March. Despite media reports that the plane was hijacked, I wish to be very clear. We are still investigating all possibilities as to what caused MH370 to deviate from its original flight path.
Immediately after the aircraft was declared missing, Vietnamese rescue planes spotted some large oil slicks in the Gulf of Thailand, just off of To Chu Island. However, after some initial fears, it was discovered that these actually came from a nearby ship. As a result of the information provided from the military radar about Malaysia 370's position, what had begun as a search of the Malaysian government focusing on the area of disappearance between the Gulf of Thailand and the South China Sea quickly became a multinational rescue operation involving 22 military aircraft and 19 ships from China, Australia, Malaysia, and Japan, with New Zealand, USA, South Korea, and the UK contributing also. This initial search effort covered the Strait of Malacca, the Andaman Sea, and the Bay of Bengal. New Zealand and the USA's P-3 Orions and P-8 Poseidons were utilized for their ability to detect large metal objects, whilst the Australian Navy's disaster relief vessel ADV Ocean Shield and the Royal Navy survey ship HMS Echo began to take the search underwater in the hope of detecting acoustic location signals, or pings, from the missing aircraft's black box.
An Australian ship is investigating a signal detected in the search for missing flight MH370. It comes soon after news that a Chinese ship detected pulses 24 hours apart within 2 kilometers of one another. Once she has investigated this third ping signal, Ocean Shield will join HMS Echo in investigating the Chinese detection zone. The British ship was about 14 hours away at the time of the press conference. Black boxes have a battery life of 30 days, and 4 weeks on from the plane mysteriously disappearing, time is running out.
A number of these pings were eventually detected by Chinese search ships using handheld equipment. ADV Ocean Shield was then deployed to narrow down the location of the pings with a towed pinger locator. This process of triangulation of the signal involves towing the locator over multiple track lines until an approximate source can be deduced. Once a precise location was determined, a focused seabed search was planned using an unmanned Bluefin 21 in the location. As time ticked by, Australia decided to pause the surface search in order to concentrate on the efforts to underwater. Using the SATCOM-influenced flight path and taking into account oceanic drift, the Australian government established multiple new areas of refinement to the search. However, because the southern Indian Ocean is so remote and expansive, very little was known about the projected crash area. As such, the search was split into 2 parts. Part 1 involved a bathymetric survey of the ocean floor, mapping out the contours and depths to more accurately ascertain what equipment could and could not be used, which then guided Part 2, a seafloor search that used multi-beam sonar equipment to collect high-resolution images of the seabed in an attempt to locate either MH370 or some element of wreckage that could lead to its whereabouts. multiple shipwrecks in obscure geological formations raised suspicions amongst the 4.6 million square kilometers of ocean that were searched. But no indication of MH370 was found.
Here, they still can't pinpoint the exact coordinates of the plane, so the search at sea will continue. Lewis Vaughan-Jones, ITV News.
Parce que les familles ne pouvaient pas continuer à voler jusqu'à 8h du matin au large de l'Australie. Oh non, il aurait pu très bien atteindre Diego Garcia, mais l'avion a volé plusieurs milliers de kilomètres après Diego. The journalists in La Réunion just sent us a picture just to investigate if it could shoot with an aircraft, with a piece of an aircraft. So we just, with my team, we just looked at hundreds and thousands of pictures. We just tried to figure out which plane it could belong to. We found only one match. It was the flaperon of a Boeing 777. And not only the shape match, but also all the connections and all the holes that are very specific for this kind of pieces of plane.
In July of 2015, a piece of aircraft debris was discovered washed up on a beach on Reunion Island in the western Indian Ocean. The item was a trailing edge control surface, known as a flaperon, from the right wing of a large-scale commercial airliner.
I also saw that there's a reference number on this part of the airplane. It doesn't fit with a serial number of a full airplane or with an immatriculation of plane, but it suits, it might be just a serial number of this specific piece. So I'm quite sure that now in Boeing they know exactly if this piece belongs to a Boeing 777, and if it does, if it's the MH370. It appears that some specialists also say that the shells that are on this wreckage are just specific of something that spent about a year and a half or 2 years in the water.
It was transported to Toulouse in France, where it was examined by the BEA, or Civil Aviation Accident Investigation Agency. Malaysia too sent its own investigators. And on the 3rd of September 2015, thanks to serial numbers found on internal components of the flaperon, it was conclusively determined by these groups to be linked with certainty to Flight 370.
Scientists believe the waves and winds that sweep the Indian Ocean could easily carry the debris from the suspected crash site west to the shores of Réunion.
The question now is, of course, what more wreckage might be out there and whether it's heading this way. Réunion Island is a long way from anywhere, and we are still a long way from solving this mystery.
The find completely reignited the search for the missing aircraft, this time approximately 2,200 nautical miles west of the original underwater search area in the southern Indian Ocean.
The latest discovery of debris has focused the search effort from an area spanning 7.6 million square kilometres to just 350 down in the southern Indian Ocean. The two objects spotted were just outside the southern search corridor. If it is debris, investigators then have to judge where the plane hit the sea. But as these real-time images show, currents and winds and waves here are erratic. By now, debris could have been carried 100 kilometres in various directions from the original location. The waters here are at least 2,000 metres deep and could be reached by submarines. But if the main fuselage is only partially submerged, even stronger currents underwater could have carried it much further.
Debris could move certainly 600 or 700 kilometres perhaps over a 2-week timescale, but it really depends upon whether the currents are travelling in the same direction or whether they've been caught in a vortex, in which case they may be quite close to the area of the original debris field.
The Wright Flaperon would become the first of 39 articles of debris to be recovered over the coming decade, all of some degree of interest to the MH370 investigation, all of which were discovered around the shorelines of southeastern Africa and its neighboring islands. Whilst Reunion Island is a considerable distance from the projected crash location, it's important to take into account the time period of 16 months between the loss of the aircraft and the first piece of debris being recovered. Investigators conducted a study of predicted oceanic drift for generic MH370 debris, using ocean current and wind speeds, of which the locations of debris discovered were generally very consistent. Unfortunately, however, not every piece of debris possessed a verifiable detail, such as a serial number. Some efforts have been made to verify the debris in other ways, and as it stands, of the 39 pieces recovered, 3 are confirmed to be from MH370, 7 are considered almost certain, 12 likely or highly likely, 10 possible, and the remaining are simply too difficult to accurately classify.
Interior cabin of the plane is my amateur opinion. We'll see what the professional. He's in the rocks. The rocks keep it there. It comes here. Gangui. The same place.
Same place.
MH370 Cove.
Oh, Cove.
We walked by, nothing there. 30 minutes we were at the next cove, and when we came back, we found this washed shore.
刚刚冲上来的。
昨天也是昨天那个人力地检发现的，还是一个网站。
哦，这块也是，同样的
有没有东西？
The same.
Despite the inconsistencies, the Flaperon was the first tangible crash evidence, and more specifically, evidence that the aircraft had crashed somewhere in the Indian Ocean. Investigators hoped that with this would come some answers as to what happened to MH370 after it disappeared on March 8, 2014. Upon initial investigation of the aircraft contents, the cargo manifest was thoroughly examined. Malaysian police questioned Chinese importers, and particularly the handlers of some 4,500 kilograms worth of fruit that was on board, to rule out sabotage. Also on the manifest was a pallet of lithium-ion batteries, which raised some suspicion. The batteries were part of a 2,400 kilogram consignment being sent from a Motorola Solutions facility. Lithium-ion batteries are notably extremely flammable and susceptible to temperature change. However, none of the recovered debris showed any major indication of a fire on board. Investigators theorized that a fire could explain the initial return to Malaysia, and that perhaps the pilot attempted to turn back to land to try to make an emergency landing. However, whilst lithium-ion ignition and fire has unfortunately been the cause of air accidents on transport aircraft before, if a fire did occur on board between checkpoint Igari and Batad, and the aircraft then continued to fly for such a long period of time, it is simply impossible that the debris would show no indications of this fire. And of course, the aircraft didn't attempt to return to Malaysia, nor did they establish any contact with the ground station to report said fire. The lack of communication prompted the potential theory of hypoxia, which can occur when an aircraft fails to pressurize and results in the crew becoming incapacitated from a lack of oxygen upon reaching a certain altitude. In the event of hypoxia, emergency oxygen masks will trigger throughout the plane. It is then protocol for whoever is in control of the aircraft to make an immediate descent to breathable altitude, whereby the emergency oxygen supply is no longer needed and an emergency landing can be made. The military radar recorded altitude information about the aircraft during its earlier stages. However, it's been completely disregarded from the investigation due to being largely inconsistent and at some points completely unfeasible. All simulated attempts to follow the exact course plotted by the military radar were completely unsuccessful. Investigators have conclusively determined that the first bank after checkpoint Igari was only possible under manual control, but further turns over Penang and toward the Indian Ocean were well within the means of the autopilot. With no indication whether an emergency response occurred or any solid communication with the crew, the investigation became a mess of misdirections, all pointing to different outcomes. Had MH370 become a ghost flight, or was it very much under the control of someone on board? Malaysian police turned the spotlight to the 227 passengers on board, 3 of which were flagged. One passenger was briefly under suspicion of potential hijacking because of his skills working as a flight engineer for another charter company. 2 passengers on board raised suspicions when it was discovered that they were traveling with stolen passports. However, on further investigation, it was ascertained that these 2 were simply seeking asylum in China, and that there was no evidence or motive pointing to them hijacking MH370 for any reason. The Malaysian police seized the financial records of all 12 crew members on board MH370, as well as carefully studying CCTV of them with a behavioral analyst to look for causation for any potential nefarious activity. They found nothing out of the ordinary. However, a deeper dive was taken into the pilot, Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah, and the first officer, Farik Abdul Hamid. Beside the situation involving Farik Abdul Hamid's mobile phone, investigators found nothing suspicious about his history or actions surrounding MH370. A search of Zahari Ahmad Shah's property went underway, and the findings were analyzed and documented in a special investigation report. Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah was an incredibly experienced pilot with over 18,000 hours of recorded flight time over a 33-year career with Malaysian Airlines. 8,659 of which were flown on the Boeing 777. He had a notably impressive track record, being designated as a type rating instructor and type rating examiner on the Boeing 777. He was a widely respected senior pilot with a clean history. A personal investigation into Zahari was conducted but returned no evidence of out-of-character behavior or anomalies on his financial or medical records. He was 53 at the time of his disappearance, leaving behind a wife and 3 children. In the report, it was understood that within his home, Captain Zahari possessed a very sophisticated flight simulator. A string of emails and message board posts were found between Zahari and other online enthusiasts and engineers that detail the construction of his simulator.
Hi everyone, this is a YouTube video that I made as a community service after learning a lot from YouTube and forum and Wikipedia regarding the household air conditioning unit. We're basically talking about the inverter type 1 horsepower using the R410A gas. This video is to be used to optimize your heat pump or your compressor in order to reduce your...
Since MH370's disappearance, members of these communities have come forward to vouch for Zahari's character. Others simply to support the claim that some pilots are so enthusiastic about flying that it's not unusual whatsoever for them to have a home simulator of a realistic caliber such as this. When investigators seized his simulator's hard drive, they discovered it wiped, but were since able to recover some information about numerous flights Zahari had undertaken, including one supposed flight that involved a northwest heading up the Strait of Malacca, a south deviation, and ending in the South Indian Ocean. This finding was notably missing from the initial investigation report and wasn't properly revealed until a leak of confidential documents in 2016. This leak acknowledged the recovered route and reported it being studied in support of a case against Captain Zahari and a potential murder-suicide plot. This was enough for the press and a large majority to assume Zahari responsible for the disappearance.
Malaysian authorities had previously declined to confirm a report by New York Magazine that Zahari had conducted a simulated flight into the remote southern Indian Ocean less than a month before the plane disappeared under similar circumstances. The Boeing jet carried 239 passengers and crew on board on a flight from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing in March 2014. The plane then veered thousands of miles off course into the Indian Ocean and disappeared.
This leak also details, however, the nature of the data's recovery. Because the drive had been wiped, the route was pieced together from 7 loose coordinates recovered from an autosave made by the software X-Plane 10, not necessarily one route or flight session. Within the report, investigators conclude that the integrity of the information recovered was not nearly strong enough to warrant this as premeditation, as some have deduced.
Malaysian 370, contact Ho Chi Minh 120.9, good night.
The only evidence that points to something being amiss with Zahari is the communications that he had with Kuala Lumpur Air Traffic Control. Upon reaching checkpoint Agari and subsequently entering Vietnamese airspace, either Captain Zahari or his first officer should have established contact with Ho Chi Minh on frequency 120.9. While Zahari confirms this instruction via radio, he notably does not repeat the frequency back to ATC, which is standard procedure. Instead, he simply replies,
Good night, Malaysian 370.
Whilst this is not necessarily protocol, taking into account Captain Zahari's extensive aviation career, it's not unusual for a pilot of his caliber and experience level to abbreviate the message slightly. Was it simply a mistake? Or perhaps a sign that Zahari was not concerned with reaching Ho Chi Minh City at all? We may never know.
Malaysian police have spent the weekend investigating members of the crew, as well as passengers and engineers who had contact with Flight 370 before it departed. They've also searched the home of the pilot, Zahari Ahmed Shah, and his sophisticated flight simulator has also been removed from his house. Experts are analysing it now, we understand. The home of the co-pilot, a 27-year-old Farik Abdul Hamid, has also been searched, and that has fueled intense speculation here in Kuala Lumpur about the actions of the pilots on the night the plane disappeared. Remember, the last contact we had with the cockpit of Flight 370 was a relaxed-sounding, all right, good night. That was to air traffic controllers as the plane entered Vietnamese airspace. So I took the opportunity to ask the Minister of Transport today about it. Was the ACAR's data system pulled or disabled before the pilot said, all right, good night to Malaysia Air Traffic Control, or was it disabled afterwards?
Yes, it was disabled before.
That's significant because it suggests that this scheme to render the plane invisible and fly it off course was well planned, it was well thought through, and it suggests that it was the pilot or the co-pilot who switched off the plane's communications gear or were forced to do so under duress. It's not just the pilots who are under investigation, though. The passengers are as well, although little progress has been made there. The Malaysian police chief today said that their names had been passed on to a few foreign intelligence agencies, but they'd come back, he said, with nothing.
It's so important that we get
some form of closure. It's so important that they do not give up on the people that we love. In the interest of aviation safety, it is important that they don't give up so easily, because if this were ever to happen again, we want to know that the people responsible will be committed.
I feel that we all taken on this long merry-go-round, something cruel, but I think something totally unavoidable. It is I feel it's a very, very big story beyond you and me. And I think even governments have to play their role, careful with what they say, what they don't say. We will never find this plane. This plane was never meant to be found.
It's not the end, although they found something, it's not the end. They still need to find the whole plane and our spouses as well.
Yes.
We still want them back.
Yeah, definitely.
One piece of debris doesn't represent my husband. It just says the plane is there, so now you need to bring everybody back. Only want everybody back, no matter, as Lee said, in whatever form. At least we can give them a proper send-off and say goodbye properly. Definitely, we know they ended their lives at the Indian Ocean, as Prime Minister Najib said, last year. But as of any accident, you want the whole person back if you can get them. Like MH370, they didn't get the whole body back. They only had them back in parts. So at least there is some.
Across the internet, there are a number of dedicated communities surrounding MH370, all drawing their own conclusions based on the information that is known. Unfortunately, the fact remains that there is simply not enough conclusive evidence to be able to confirm what happened to MH370 and its 239 occupants.
And in the absence of credible new evidence.
Last month, Australia, China, and Malaysia said the search would be suspended by the end of 2016.
This does not mean that we have given up on locating MH370.
Officials said the mission could be revived if fresh leads come up. The search cost has amounted to more than $130 million, making it the most expensive in aviation history.
In early 2017, the governments of Malaysia, China, and Australia announced they were suspending the search for MH370, citing a lack of evidence that points to a more specific location of the aircraft. Debris findings around the east coast of Africa were said to have continued to inform the definition of the search area at that time. But the search did not resume until a year later, when American marine robots company Ocean Infinity offered to assist in the search for the aircraft on a no-fine, no-fee basis.
If there are any credible leads and any specific proposal, especially from Ocean Infinity, we are more than willing to look at it, and we are prepared to discuss with them the new proposal. Of course, after the end of the search last year, there was no fresh proposal from Ocean Infinity, because the search cannot be done throughout the year. There are certain periods of because of weather and so on. There are other factors involved. So if Ocean Infinity comes back with a fresh proposal, we are ready to discuss with them.
Ocean Infinity's confidence in their technology and strategy provided a glimmer of hope for the families of those missing. However, the 2018 search yielded no new findings, and the lack of new debris has made the process of refining search location incredibly difficult. It concluded in May of the same year.
There is no closure until the plane is found, until we exactly know what happened to the aircraft and to our loved ones on board. Yes, it gets tougher every year because we are all expecting, some answers.
We have absolutely no idea why it disappeared and where it is. And that's not a happy situation to be in for you, for me, and for anybody in the world, and for everybody who flies to their destinations day in and day out. Because if it's happened once, I believe it could happen again.
In the wake of the 10th anniversary of this tragic disappearance, Ocean Infinity have announced their commitment to resume the search, pending approval by the Malaysian government. They believe they would benefit from their search for the Argentine submarine ARA San Juan, and Oliver Plunkett, the CEO, claims to be in possession of sufficient credible new evidence to inform this new search effort. Could it be that this new evidence leads to some definitive answers to one of the greatest aviation mysteries ever? Only time will tell.